My fiance is about to talk about trains, so you better be nice to him.
Yo guys, how's it going? My name's Phil. I am a photojournalist, photographer, video editor, transit user, and city lover. And today's Teachable Travels is going to be huge.
You're doing so good.
Back in May 2025, my lovely partner and I went to England and show them what we did when we were in England.
Boom.
Yeah.
Boom.
It's all good. It's just it's a little blurry, but we got it. We were there for about 10 days and we spent our first 4 in
London, baby!
Typically on this channel, I will compare what my adopted home of Baltimore City can learn from the rest of the world. But this video is going to be one of those special cases where I don't just focus on Baltimore City. Why? Because London's population is almost 20 times that of Baltimore City and more than 4 times the entire Baltimore metropolitan area. Basically, any one-to-one comparison is going to be largely useless in the grand scheme of things. So I want to use this video to showcase how I think every American city can learn from one of the most robust transit agencies on Earth. We're going to look at London through the lens of cities like Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, DC, Miami, New York, Philly, Baltimore, and I'm going to compare pieces of London's transit network to as many of those cities as possible, and then present what I think all of them can learn from the English capital. So, without further ado, the buses. Like with Dublin, London largely uses Volvo, Wrightbus, and Alexander Dennis double-decker buses. The most common London bus currently is a Volvo B5TL chassis with a Wrightbus Gemini 3 body.
Nerd alert!
As I've said before on this channel, I love the double-decker model for a lot of reasons, but my favorite is just how much road space it clears up. North American buses are often clunky in that the articulated ones meant to increase capacity are oftentimes 60 feet long and make almost tractor-trailer-like turns pretty frequently that fairly constrain the quickness of the bus itself along routes that aren't complete straight shots. Don't get me wrong, though. That's not to say that the double-deckers are perfect by any means. In my experience, the loading and unloading procedures can be pretty discombobulated, and it's pretty standard, seemingly, to have traffic jams of passengers going up and down the stairs, which can make dwell times at stops a pain in the ass. Overall, though, I'd love to see these buses on North American streets because it just provides a really cool experience. Obviously, I know the Buy America constraints here, but buses in the US are stigmatized pretty severely, and I haven't seen a single American board a double-decker bus in the United Kingdom or in Ireland, go to the upper level, look out the front window, and hate it. I get that it's different when it's your everyday commute, but you can't tell me that it's not a little bit cool. That said, elephant in the room time. Bus depots in the United States are incredibly expensive to construct and maintain, and lacking space in them can often create a domino effect of issues. Maintenance deferrals, drivers spending more time after and before shifts getting to specific depots, both of which can lead to overall frequency suffering in lots of US cities, especially more spread out ones with more traffic than road space. Basically, where I land on this is if you can maintain the capacity of a 60-foot bus on a 35-foot bus, you can fit a lot more buses into a lot more depot lots, allowing you to increase your rolling stock and pool of drivers pretty significantly, meaning your frequencies can theoretically increase. And then there's always the added benefit of being able to tell the politicians that always want to cut resources from public transportation that you're doing more with less. Also, let's not pretend London doesn't have a lot of rail trestles and overpasses like we do in the States. There are places these buses might not be able to go in the US, but ideally you'd keep these in high capacity areas like downtown corridors, tourist districts, airport routes, or servicing major employment hubs where weird turns and short clearances are a rarity. Anyway, this doesn't mean that these buses are a one-size-fits-all issue, but they do provide a very interesting use case that I don't think we think about enough in the US. Now, when it comes to bus coverage, I feel like most US cities punch well above their weight, particularly Baltimore City and Philadelphia. But Philadelphia before all of the stupid cuts and then no cuts and then cuts again.
Snip, snap, snip, snap, snip, snap.
Basically, I don't think from a coverage perspective, there's much that London can teach us, except for one really cool thing. It's called the Superloop. This is a radial loop made up of several different bus routes around London that exclusively focuses on connecting people in suburban areas or outer urban neighborhoods with rail and tram connections without having to go into central London and then back out again. We see routes kind of like this in places like New York and Chicago, but nothing as comprehensive as London. Though I will say Chicago's a weird case because to do quote-unquote suburban radial anything, you basically just have to go north and south in a relatively straight line. So I guess technically speaking, Chicago has the best of these routes in North America. I don't know. Chicago people, if I have that wrong, feel free to write me up the riot act in the comments or whatever. New York has lots of express bus service in boroughs like the Bronx and Manhattan that can get you around them without going through main portions of each borough. But it's hard to find routes as useful as London's because, frankly, outside New York City, we don't have nearly as many rail connections to actually connect people with. That said, one city I think can really benefit from this is Boston. It's got routes like the 65, the 66, and the 86 that do a good job connecting all the Green Line branches to each other, but Boston's rail map isn't just the Green Line, despite what the Green Line expansion fantasy maps may tell you. It needs radial bus coverage that gets to every rail line from every other rail line. Easy to use, radial suburban routes would do a whole lot of good getting people to choose transit if they know their way to get from the Green Line to the Orange Line as a bus that's coming every 5 to 8 minutes at peak. I know that the traffic in Boston makes this idea sort of an easier said than done type of thing, but let's not pretend London does not have absolutely ridiculous congestion. I also think the Baltimore area could emulate this really well. There's a reason that a bus route like the Local Link 22 is so popular here, and that's because it's a radial route that connects the light rail, subway link, and highest ridership CityLink routes all in one very frequent run. On the west side of the metro area, though, there's not a lot of super frequent radial bus service. For example, the Local Link 80 can pick you up from the Rogers Ave Metro Link station, but if you want to take that to the West Baltimore MARC station, you end up having to make a 7-minute transfer on foot that may be the difference between making your train and not making it. Yeah, that's splitting hairs, but it could be a lot better because so many buses in Baltimore actually stop at the base of the stairs at that MARC station, allowing people to literally make a transfer of 60 seconds or less. And if you've ever had to ride public transportation for work, you know that every minute counts. On frequencies, central London's bus routes can often run every 4 to 6 minutes at peak, which is incredibly frequent. I don't think I have to tell any Americans watching this video this, but the US doesn't touch that with a 10-foot pole, even in a place like New York City. Okay, so what about one thing bus-wise that the United States has gotten pretty good at in the last decade or so? Bus lanes. Unfortunately, London basically laps us. They've got nearly 200 miles of bus lanes and bus corridors. By comparison, New York City has 150 miles, Chicago has about 100, and everybody else... Listen, we've made some strides in the States as far as bus lanes go, but we've got streets that are far too wide not to be putting bus lanes on essentially every single arterial that we can. And before anybody jumps down my throat here, no, I am not talking about your suburban arterial highway that goes through your county. I'm talking about arterials that were built in cities in this country. Places where sidewalks were once super wide and were shrunk for cars to run at speed through neighborhoods. Yes, they exist, and yes, they need to be turned into bus lanes. Places like Tampa, Orlando, Atlanta, Charlotte, Nashville, Memphis, and so many other major U.S. cities could really improve bus reliability with bus lanes like that, while also doing some much-needed traffic calming. Yes, I know Southerners are going to come for me for that one, but you know what? if all you're going to do is have buses and cop out whenever there's a rail mode suggested for your city and say, well, we have buses, can't they use those instead? Then you know what? You need bus lanes to make them effective. Otherwise, you're just purposely cutting transit funding just to cut it.
And that's the point.
Anyway, on to London and the UK's rail modes. The passenger rail infrastructure in the United Kingdom, and yes, UK viewers, I do also mean outside of London, is far superior to what you see in the United States. For some added context, I said we spent the first 4 days in London. The latter 5 to 6 days were spent in Western Cornwall. And even there, in the midst of touristy beaches and farmland as far as the eye can see, you could take cross-country Southwestern Railway and Great Western Railway trains to the beach. Not to mention basically about every major town or city in the region. And if you couldn't get there by train, Transport for Cornwall could get you there on a bus. And frankly, they were a lot better frequency-wise than buses I've seen in cities like Memphis, Atlanta, Houston. As an American, I cannot explain to you in enough words how bizarre it is to be in a place with that many farm animals and be able to get places on public transportation without the need to rent a car. Yes, walkability and compact towns and cities are a big part of this, but frankly, the rail coverage, despite its flaws that we will address, I promise, is very solid, and the bus supplementation is frankly great. Again, these are by my standards as an American. As far as intercity rail travel goes, I love the trains in the UK, which should tell you everything about the dire state of rail travel in the US. Don't get me wrong, there were some obvious delays and snags that we hit along the way. So not on this trip, but on a previous one we made a few years ago, we decided that we were going to make the genius decision to have an 8-hour flight from our area airport to London Heathrow, get on the Heathrow Express, take it to Paddington, and then immediately get on a 5-hour train ride from London Paddington to Western Cornwall. And we did all of that on like 3 hours of sleep because neither one of us can sleep on a plane. Suffice it to say, don't do that. We decided that this time we were going to just stay in London for a few days instead of going right from the airport to Cornwall, and it made all the difference in the world. On this trip, our train from the west of Cornwall back to London was smooth and uneventful, but the train to Cornwall was fraught with delays. But I have to emphasize that this was not because of any avoidable mistakes. There were a bunch of storms when we went, and a ton of trees fell on the tracks, and they had to move them. But I will say, one of my major issues with the railways out this way is they're sometimes even single tracked. Now, 2 tracks per direction is the obvious desire here, but even 1 per direction with the relief for express track in the middle would be better than whatever the current bottleneck is in lots of places in the UK's intercity rail network. And if it's half as disjointed in the rest of the UK as it is in Cornwall, then that is a huge issue. But what can American intercity passenger rail learn from the UK's? Well, first things first, the United States should largely just, have an intercity passenger rail network. Outside Amtrak's Northeast Corridor, we largely do not. And before anybody jumps down my throat, I do know we have the Cascades and the California Corridor and the Hiawatha, but please hear me out. The city of Penzance, which is all the way out west in Cornwall, has a population of 20,000 people. The entire Cornish region has a population of 580,000 people. To put that into perspective, that is the population of Baltimore City or Milwaukee, Wisconsin, spread out into an area the size of Massachusetts. And 85% of households in Cornwall own a car, which is very comparable to most U.S. metro areas. You know how many train trips there are between Penzance and London every single weekday? 34. You know how many train trips there are between Penzance and Plymouth, which is the most populated city in Cornwall, home to 270,000 people? 63. Amtrak's Northeast Corridor, a behemoth of North American rail travel, servicing a mega region of tens of millions of people, runs just 64 trains between the capital of the United States of America and New York City. One more than Penzance to Plymouth. Now, that is only considering Amtrak trains. In reality, the Northeast Corridor runs a lot more per weekday if you count the numerous local transit agencies that run regional and commuter trains along it. So, yeah, you're right. Bad comparison. But let's do another region that has massive populations. Do you know how many inner city trains there are between Chicago and Milwaukee? 16.
You're kidding.
Again, that is an area with almost 5 million people.
Jesus Christ.
8 to Milwaukee and 8 back to Chicago. All right, well, what about like LA to San Diego? That's like 5.5 million people too, with fairly solid local public transit in their cities. 24.
Are you serious?
12 to LA Union Station and 12 back to San Diego. All right, let's stop doing just Amtrak. What about Brightline in Florida? Miami to Orlando is like 6 or so million, right? And Orlando doesn't have very good public transit, but Miami's got more than you might think.
Go ahead, make my day.
32. So wait, you're telling me more trains service an area with a combined population of 580,000 people than 3 separate American city pairs of 15 million people combined?
I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
As much as I would like it to be, this isn't even as easy as just run more trains. Amtrak's already running so many trains on the Northeast Corridor that it's basically at capacity given the tracks they have. I wrote about this in my Substack over the summer, which I will link in the description below. But basically, Amtrak has a lot of constraints on a lot of the tracks that it uses, even the ones it owns, that UK Intercity Rail just doesn't have. For one, the average speed of trains from London to the UK's other major population centers is around 85 to 90 miles an hour. The average speed of the Northeast Regional along Amtrak's Northeast Corridor from DC to New York, 65 miles an hour. Basically, despite the congestion, the UK is dealing with much better track conditions and rights-of-way that allow for much higher speeds than literally any city pair in the United States. So, what that means is the need for Amtrak to go an average of 50 miles an hour through the passenger rail speed bump that is the state of Connecticut, or having to make stops at random park and rides outside major metro areas, all accumulate into lowering Amtrak's average speed along our busiest train corridor to less than that of a corridor servicing 580,000 people in the west of England. I want to be crystal clear to any Brits that may be watching this. When Americans go over there and they brag about how awesome your rail infrastructure is, we're not just gassing your stuff up because we want to be nice. We are quite literally confounded because of how bad what we have back in the States is by comparison. Moving on from intercity passenger rail service to intra-city passenger rail service, and to the reason behind this shirt, London's Underground is an absolute unit. 11 lines, 272 stations, 4 million passengers per day, not even including the overground lines, the Elizabeth line, the DLR, or the trams. It's also one of the only public transportation agencies in the world that actually makes money in terms of operational costs. So what can the London Underground teach American metro systems? Firstly, it can teach us to stop thinking of metro and transit stations as merely places for people to get on and off of a train. The beautiful thing about the London Underground isn't its efficiency, cleanliness, safety, and reliability. And yes, again, guys, I know that you in the UK don't actually think that about your stuff, but we do because it's so bad here. What's impressive is Transport for London's ability to consistently put on a global clinic in the practice of what's called value capture. Transport for London, or TfL as it's called, is a UK nonprofit that is allowed to purchase and develop real estate as a part of their mission to supply public transportation to the British people and their visitors. Its property arm is under the TfL umbrella and is called Places for London. This means that part of TfL's business model isn't just its 4 million daily riders. It's the over 2,500 businesses that set up shop in and around TfL stations and their millions of customers that help subsidize the operation and construction costs of the system. It's the thing transit detractors in the US are unknowingly pointing to when they talk about Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Osaka's metros being quote-unquote private entities that can turn a profit. Spoiler alert, they are not. They're private in the way that they don't take direct taxpayer subsidy in the way that agencies in the US do, but they are a federal entity in that they get given the land to develop for basically nothing by the government, and the government allows them to keep all the profit without paying them back for the initial land acquisition. London's TfL operates similarly. Most US systems do not. There are property acquisition and management arms of U.S. transit agencies. Even Maryland's MTA has one. But they are primarily used to pay out eminent domain settlements and build parking lots. Now, obviously, there are places like New York and Boston where some stations have like coffee places or those like Hudson News things on or near the platforms. But these things are all over stations in London and outside of it. And that is the difference between having an operational deficit and an operational surplus. New York's MTA does do value capture. So does Amtrak. So does WMATA. So does SEPTA. And so does the CTA in Chicago. They all do it. But why is London's TfL so successful at it? That is all down to where people live. In places like Baltimore, DC, and Atlanta, the metro wasn't built to connect people from one part of the city to another part of the city the way it was in London, or even in places like New York City. Those metro systems were meant to keep people off the highway. That's why most of the land around stations on MARTA, Maryland's MTA, and WMATA are giant parking lots with nothing else to them, despite being a part of heavy rail metro systems that operate as subways. Now, the state governments in Georgia and Maryland and Virginia are changing that, but the problem is the decades of stunted growth in value capture have led to untold billions of dollars in uncaptured value slipping through the fingers of these transit agencies that could have been used to subsidize their operational costs system-wide. And by that, I don't mean uncaptured rent from people living in apartments near the stations. I mean rent from businesses who operate specifically to serve riders and commuters goods and services along their commutes into and out of the main hub of the network, which in turn can create sort of these little town centers around transit stops. It's easy to say London's Underground can teach US cities a ton about operations and frequencies and all that, but the real lesson we can learn from them is building transit-oriented development. And not just building it, but making the steps necessary to do so legal. Local, not in my backyard types in the US will fight for decades against development in an empty parking lot and act like it's called a historic site just so that they can protect their own property values. It's selfish, it's wrong, it helps exacerbate the housing crisis, and it needs reform. So what does that reform look like? Largely, it means that two main things need to be true. I just realized I flipped off like half the people watching this video from the UK, and I am so sorry. First, projects on or near transit stations need to no longer be at the mercy of local zoning regulations. Basically, taking away the Euclidean zoning around transit stations. That means no more parking minimums. This is happening in a lot of US states, and it's a great start. Second, if a project is confirmed and signed into law by elected representatives, a petition with a couple hundred signatures on it from people who didn't want the project can no longer be enough to stop it. Now, on to other granular things that the underground can teach us. Foremost, for me at least, the amount of security and janitorial staff at underground stations far exceed your typical US metro system, with the exception of maybe DC's metro. The stations themselves are also built relatively easy to clean and less leaky than those in the States. Go to a station on SEPTA's Broad Street line, Boston's MBTA Green Line, or New York's older subway lines, and you'll see more ambiguous puddles and decades of dust caked on steel support beams than you've ever thought possible. To say that US metro systems need an overhaul is the understatement of the century. On newer systems like BART, LA Metro, Miami Metro Rail, and others, the feel is a lot cleaner and far less dingy. But that's more to do with the infrastructure's age than this idea that we have to staff everything with janitors and excess security. That said, almost every major American transit agency, but especially SEPTA, has been routinely showing off their deep cleaning skills on social media, and it's actually been really nice to see. And speaking of things that are nice to see, the London Underground signage is elite. Places like Philly, Boston, Atlanta, Chicago, and almost every single US metro system I've ever ridden have what I call implied signage. Signs that point you in the right direction while also assuming you know that you need to make an extra left or go down an extra set of stairs to actually get somewhere. The London Underground tells you so much info at almost every turn, it's basically difficult to get lost if you've ridden a subway even once or twice in your life. Do people still get on the wrong train in London all the time? Yeah. But do people in Boston, Philly, and New York get on the wrong train way more? Yeah. Part of the beauty of the signage on the Underground is almost all London's train lines connect to each other. Fare integration and transfers on the tube are fairly seamless in comparison to any American cities. Going from the Underground to the Overground or certain regional and commuter lines is so easy in some places, the trains board on the same platform. New York, and God love you, famously sucks in this regard. So does Philly, DC, and virtually every other major metro area in the country. Boston's actually pretty good at it, but that's mostly because the MBTA runs both the commuter system and the light rail and subways. Though they don't do any of that running on the same tracks and boarding on the same platform thing. Out on the West Coast, where every other regional or commuter carrier is a different system entirely, forget it. Looking at you, San Francisco Bay Area. So why does this even matter? We do not have the benefit in the US of transit being a non-partisan issue. It's not a fact of life for most people, and it's not even a given that people use it in major cities in this country. Public transportation in the US is looked at as annoying competition for car companies, to the point where car companies will literally lobby the state and federal governments to not invest in mass transit modes in places that absolutely would benefit from them. Because of this, every single thing American transit agencies can do to simplify and unify the look, feel, and operation of the customer experience will create a return customer not just in San Francisco or Seattle or LA, but in Miami and Atlanta and DC. A good experience taking the train to the airport in Atlanta may be the difference between somebody deciding to do that same thing in Denver or DC. If your fare system doesn't allow you to simply tap to pay and get on to, say, the Patco Speed Line in New Jersey, then transfer to the Broad Street Line in Philly, people are going to drive from Philadelphia to New Jersey or vice versa instead and clog up Philadelphia's already narrow and congested streets. On top of obvious zoning reasons, London doesn't have this problem because it recognized long ago that the billion railways that they have to worry about need cohesion. The fact that we can't figure that out in the United States is not down to us being stupid Americans. It's down to us not caring enough about mass transit as an option for everyday people in US cities. Overall, while the tube is iconic and reaches just about every corner of London, its simplicity to use is why it's so good at what it does, and why people who come from American cities with subways and metros of their own can't stop talking about how good the rider experience is. And just so I don't get too much flack for ignoring things south of the Thames, we did not have a lot of time to go down and ride the trams, so that's not going to be in this video, unfortunately, but it won't be the last time we go to London, so the next time we do go, it will definitely be something I focus on. Basically, what I hope council people, mayors, deputy mayors, and their staffs see when they make overseas trips to cities like London and ooh and ah at the transit there is that most US cities are a couple of fairly easy policy moves away from achieving similar levels of success. Thanks for watching. Appreciate you.